Welcome to our deep dive into 1 John chapter 4.
1 John 4.
We're going to explore what this letter has to say to you today.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
This chapter was originally written to early Christians facing a lot of external pressures, persecution,
Oh, yeah.
internal struggles with false teachings,
Yeah, like all over the place.
everywhere.
They were popping up everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like they were facing a world that was just
Yeah.
determined to pull them away
What?
from their faith.
In the midst of all that,
Mm-hmm.
the author, who we believe to be John,
Yeah.
keeps emphasizing this one powerful idea,
Okay.
love,
Mhm.
not just as a feeling,
Right.
but as like the defining characteristic of a true follower of Jesus.
Yeah, it makes you wonder why love would be so central,
Right.
especially during times of intense challenge.
That's what we're going to unpack.
Okay.
We'll be exploring how this chapter guides us to discern truth in a confusing world, how it unlocks the power of God's love in our lives, and ultimately how it equips us to live with confidence even when things around us feel shaky.
And it all starts with a sense of urgency,
Okay.
almost like a warning siren going off.
Yeah, the chapter jumps right in to this caution
Yeah.
about testing the spirits.
Testing the spirits.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'll be honest,
Mm-hmm.
that's always felt a bit mysterious to me.
Sure.
What's the deal with all these spirits?
Well, imagine yourself back in those early Christian communities.
All right.
You've got all these self-proclaimed prophets and teachers emerging, each claiming to have the inside scoop on truth.
Yeah.
It was like the Wild West of spiritual teachings,
Oh, wow.
with a lot of potential for getting misled.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's not so different today, is it?
Right.
I mean, think about how much information
Oh, my goodness.
we're bombarded with constantly. News, opinions, social media, influencers. It can feel impossible to know
Yeah,
what's true and what's not.
exactly. And that's why John's message is so timely.
Mm-hmm.
He gives us this litmus test for discerning truth from falsehood.
Okay.
Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God.
Okay.
And every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not from God.
So it's not just about saying the words,
It's not just about saying the words.
but about genuinely believing that Jesus is who he claimed to be,
Exactly.
the Christ, the Son of God.
Yes.
But how do we actually apply that to our lives today?
Right.
I mean, it's not like we're encountering these ancient prophets
Right.
on street corners anymore.
It's about recognizing that these spirits can manifest in various ways,
Sure.
even in seemingly harmless
Yeah.
cultural trends or ideologies.
Okay.
Take, for example, the relentless pressure to achieve a certain image on social media. That spirit can distort our view of ourselves and our worth.
Wow. Yeah.
Or consider the pull of consumerism,
Okay.
constantly telling us we need more to be happy.
Right. Right.
These are the subtle spirits.
Okay.
We need to test against the truth of who Jesus is and what he stands for.
That's actually really helpful. It's like putting on a pair of spiritual glasses
It is.
that help us see the underlying messages behind all the noise.
Precisely. And John goes even further,
Okay.
pointing out that the spirit of the Antichrist
Okay.
was already at work in the world back then.
Mhm.
Now, I know that phrase can sound a bit intense.
It definitely conjures up images of some ominous,
Right.
shadowy figure.
Yeah.
Like,
But John isn't talking about a literal person here.
mm-hmm.
He's describing a spirit, an ideology
Uh-huh.
that opposes everything Jesus represents.
Okay.
Love, truth, selflessness, sacrifice.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that this spirit can manifest in more subtle ways
Okay.
than we might think.
So how do we spot this Antichrist spirit today? What does it actually look like in practice?
Well, think about the things that pull us away from God,
Okay.
the things that tempt us to compromise our values or put ourselves first.
Yeah.
It could be a culture of instant gratification,
Okay.
a constant craving for more,
Yeah.
a disregard for truth, or even a spirit of division and hatred
Oh, yeah.
that we see so prevalent in the world today.
That's everywhere.
These are all echoes of that same Antichrist spirit John warned about.
It's almost like a battle for our hearts and minds, isn't it?
Yeah.
Between the pull of the world and the truth of who Jesus is.
And that's precisely where John's next point comes in.
Okay.
He offers this incredibly encouraging truth.
Mm-hmm.
You, dear children, are from God and have overcome them.
Okay.
Because the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world.
Okay, that's a powerful statement.
It is.
He's saying that we've already overcome the world in a sense, but I'll be honest, sometimes it doesn't feel that way.
I get it.
Yeah.
It's not like we magically become immune to the world's pull once we become Christians.
Yeah.
But what John is emphasizing here is that we have access to a greater power.
Okay.
The power of God dwelling within us, which is stronger than any worldly force.
So it's not about conquering the world in a physical sense,
right?
But about standing firm in our faith even when the world tries to shake us.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our true victory isn't about worldly success or achievement, but about aligning ourselves with God's purposes and letting His power work through us.
But how do we practically live this out?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be in the world but not of it, as they say?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think it gets to the heart of what this whole chapter is about.
Okay.
It's about understanding the nature of God's love and letting it shape how we engage with the world around us.
Okay, so let's shift gears and dive into this central theme of love.
Okay.
John doesn't hold back, does he?
He doesn't.
He comes right out and says, Dear friends, let us love one another.
Yeah.
For love comes from God.
That's right.
Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God because God is love.
It's almost like he's saying that love isn't just something we do.
Right.
It's at the very core of who we are as Christians.
Right.
It's not just an action, but a defining characteristic.
Yes.
We love because we have been loved first by God.
And notice how he flips the script.
He does.
On a common misconception. We often think we need to understand God first.
Right.
In order to love him.
Yeah.
But John suggests the opposite. He says, whoever does not love does not know God because God is love.
It's like he's saying that experiencing love, both giving and receiving it, is fundamental to knowing God.
Wow, that's a powerful thought.
Isn't it?
It's like saying love isn't just a byproduct of knowing God.
Right.
But the very path to knowing him.
Exactly. And he goes even further.
Okay.
Saying that God's love is actually revealed in us. It's not just this abstract concept out there.
Yeah.
It becomes tangible
Yeah.
and visible through our lives, through our actions, through our relationships.
Okay.
We become channels of God's love to the world.
Okay, so we're talking about more than just warm, fuzzy feelings here.
We are.
Yeah, we're talking about love that's active and demonstrable.
It is.
But how is that love revealed? What does that look like in practice?
John gets very specific about this.
Okay.
This is how God showed his love among us.
Okay.
He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him.
That's where it gets really profound. He's not saying that we loved God first.
Right.
But that he loved us first. And he proved that love through the ultimate act of sacrifice, sending Jesus to die for our sins.
Right. It's this radical, unconditional love that sets the foundation for our entire faith.
Wow.
It's not about us earning God's love, but about receiving it freely and letting it transform us from the inside out.
This is so powerful.
It is.
It almost feels like we need to pause here.
I agree.
And let that sink in for a moment.
Because once we grasp the depth of God's love for us, it changes everything.
Okay.
It changes how we see ourselves, how we relate to others, and how we approach the world around us.
Okay, I think I'm ready for more.
Okay.
What happens next in this love story?
So we've established this incredible foundation of God's love for us.
Yeah.
It's this radical, undeserved gift that changes everything.
Powerful.
But John doesn't stop there.
Oh, okay.
He connects this love directly to our relationships with each other.
That's interesting. You know, whenever I think of love in the Bible, I usually jump to romantic love.
Sure.
Or even like our love for God. But you're saying John is focusing on our love for other people.
Absolutely, he says.
Okay.
Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another.
Okay.
And that word ought really stands out. It's not a suggestion.
Yeah.
It's more like that's an imperative.
Yes. Our love for each other isn't optional.
Okay.
It's a direct response to the love God has already poured out on us.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But if we're being honest,
Sure.
sometimes loving other people is hard.
It is.
What does that kind of love actually look like in everyday life?
Well, John paints this beautiful picture a few verses later when he says, "No one has ever seen God. But if we love one another, God lives in us.
Okay.
And his love is made complete in us."
That's a powerful thought.
Yeah.
It makes me think about those times when I felt closest to God. And it's often been in moments of genuine connection and love with other people.
Yeah.
It's like that love becomes a tangible expression of God's presence.
Precisely. And this really challenges the idea of a solitary, isolated spirituality.
Right.
John is saying that true faith isn't just about our individual relationship with God. It's about living that faith out in community, in tangible acts of love for one another.
But how does that work when you're dealing with difficult people?
Yeah.
You know, those folks who rub you the wrong way.
Sure.
Or maybe even hurt you.
Yeah.
Doesn't John also say somewhere that we shouldn't associate with certain people?
That's a great question. And it's something a lot of people wrestle with.
Yeah.
I think it's important to distinguish between condoning harmful behavior
and choosing to love someone despite their flaws.
Okay.
John isn't saying we have to become best friends with everyone or put ourselves in dangerous situations.
Right.
But he is calling us to a radical kind of love that seeks reconciliation, that extends grace and forgiveness, even when it's undeserved.
Okay, that makes more sense. It's about reflecting God's love.
Yes.
Which is ultimately about restoration and redemption, not just avoiding conflict.
Not just avoiding conflict.
But that can be so challenging.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
But remember, we're not in this alone.
Okay.
John reminds us that he has given us of his Spirit as evidence that we're connected to God.
Okay.
That's where we find the strength and the ability to love, even when it's hard.
That's encouraging.
Yeah.
Speaking of encouragement, there's that awesome verse about perfect love casting out fear.
That's right.
That one always gets me pumped up. But I'll admit, I'm not always sure what it means practically.
It's a verse that often gets misinterpreted.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we'll never experience fear.
Right.
Or that we can just ignore the consequences of our actions.
Oh, okay.
But it is talking about a certain kind of fear, that paralyzing fear that keeps us fully experiencing God's love and living freely as his children.
You mean like the fear of not being good enough?
Exactly.
Or the fear of rejection or failure?
Yes. And John is saying that God's perfect love has the power to cast out that kind of fear.
Okay.
It doesn't mean we won't make mistakes.
Oh, right.
Face challenges.
Yeah.
But we can face them from a place of secure acceptance in God's love.
So it's not about denying our fears, but about confronting them with the truth of God's love for us.
That's right.
That actually takes a lot of pressure off.
It does.
Yeah.
And it frees us to live more authentically, to be more honest about our struggles.
Yeah.
And to grow without being crippled by that fear of judgment.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all ties together. We're talking about a love that's rooted in God's love for us.
Yeah.
A love that empowers us to love others even when it's hard. And a love that casts out fear.
Right.
So we can live more freely.
That's right.
And that brings us to what might be one of the most challenging, but also most important points.
Yeah, one of the most important points.
In this whole chapter.
Okay,
I'm ready for it.
Okay.
Bring on the challenge.
John says, whoever claims to love God, yet hates a brother or sister is a liar.
Whoa.
For whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen, cannot love God whom they have not seen.
He doesn't mince words, does he?
He doesn't.
That's a pretty stark statement.
It is. He's calling us out
Okay.
on any hypocrisy or inconsistency in our lives.
Okay.
You can't claim to love God,
Right.
this invisible, all-powerful being, while harboring hatred or bitterness towards someone you actually see and interact with every day.
You know, sometimes I think we can get caught up
I think so too.
in the abstract idea of loving God without really thinking about how that love should be impacting our relationships with the people around us.
That's so true. It's easy to get caught up in religious rituals or theological debates.
Right.
But true love has to be more than just words. It has to be visible.
Right.
It has to be lived out.
Yeah.
It has to be demonstrated in our actions towards others.
But doesn't that get messy sometimes?
Sure.
I mean, what about those times when people really hurt us?
Yeah.
How are we supposed to love them then?
That's where it gets really tough.
Yeah.
And again, John isn't saying we have to condone bad behavior or pretend everything's fine when it's not.
Right.
But he is calling us to a higher standard.
A standard that reflects God's love.
Yes.
Which is ultimately about
it is
forgiveness and reconciliation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that everyone is created in God's image.
Okay.
And even when people make terrible choices, they still have inherent worth.
Right.
It's about choosing to see them through the lens of God's love and grace, even when it's incredibly difficult.
Wow. That's challenging.
It is.
It makes me think about some relationships in my own life where I've struggled to extend that kind of grace.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to hold on to anger or bitterness.
I think we all struggle with that.
Yeah.
But remember what we talked about earlier. God's perfect love casts out fear. And sometimes the fear of letting go of our hurt or anger can keep us from experiencing the fullness of God's love and the healing that comes with forgiveness.
This is such a rich conversation.
It is.
It's making me realize that there's so much more to love than I initially thought. Okay, so we've been talking about this radical kind of love that John describes in 1 John 4. A love that's rooted in God's love for us. A love that flows out to others. And a love that overcomes fear.
Yes.
But I have to admit, it all feels a bit daunting sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, where do we even begin to put this into practice?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I think it's something we all wrestle with. John doesn't just leave us with this lofty ideal of love.
Okay.
He actually gives us some practical guidance on how to cultivate this love in our lives.
Okay. I'm all ears.
Okay.
What's the secret formula?
Well, there's no magic formula. But John does give us a powerful reminder.
Okay.
And this commandment we have from him.
Okay.
Whoever loves God must also love their brother and sister.
So it's not just a suggestion or a nice sentiment.
It's not.
It's a command.
An obligation that flows directly from God.
Directly from God.
But how do we bridge the gap between that command and actually living it out?
I think it starts with recognizing that love is more than just a feeling.
Okay.
It's a choice we make every day. It's about actively looking for ways to demonstrate love in our interactions with others, even in the small, seemingly insignificant moments.
So it's about being intentional.
Yes.
About making a conscious effort.
Absolutely.
To choose love even when it's not easy or convenient.
Even when it's not easy.
But what does that look like in concrete terms?
Sure.
Can you give us some examples?
Think about those everyday interactions you have.
Okay.
Maybe it's choosing to listen patiently to a friend who's going through a tough time, even if you're busy.
Okay.
Or offering a helping hand to a neighbor who's struggling.
Or maybe it's simply choosing to speak kind words.
Okay.
Instead of engaging in gossip or negativity.
It's like those random acts of kindness.
It is.
That can brighten someone's day, but with a deeper, more intentional purpose behind them.
Exactly. And it's not always about grand gestures.
Right.
It can be as simple as offering a genuine compliment or sending a text message to someone who's feeling lonely.
Okay.
It's about making a conscious effort to bring a little bit of God's love into every interaction we have.
You know, that actually takes some of the pressure off.
It does.
I think sometimes we get overwhelmed by this idea of loving perfectly.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's more about those small, consistent choices we make day in and day out.
Day in and day out.
But what about those really difficult situations?
Right.
Like dealing with people who have deeply hurt us or betrayed our trust. How do we love them?
Yeah, it's where it gets really challenging.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer. But I think it's important to remember that God's love for us is unconditional.
Okay.
He doesn't love us because we're perfect or because we've earned it. He loves us despite our flaws.
Yeah.
Despite our mistakes. Despite our failures.
So you're saying that we're called to reflect that same kind of unconditional love
Yes.
in our relationships with others.
Yes.
Even those who have hurt us.
It's not about condoning their actions.
Right.
Or pretending everything's okay.
Right.
It's about choosing to see them through the lens of God's love.
Yeah.
Recognizing that they too are broken.
Yeah.
And in need of grace.
That's a tough pill to swallow sometimes.
It is.
But I can see how it aligns
Yeah.
with the overall message of 1 John 4.
I think so.
It's about letting God's love transform us from the inside out.
Yes.
So that we can then become conduits of that love.
That's right.
To the world around us, even in the messiest, most difficult situations.
Even in the messiest.
And that's where the real power lies.
It is.
When we choose to love, even when it's hard, we're not just reflecting God's love, we're actually participating in his work of redemption and reconciliation in the world.
In the world.
Okay, so let's bring this all together.
Yeah.
We started by talking about the importance of discerning truth in a world full of competing voices.
Right.
And we saw how John gives us that litmus test. True love comes from God.
Yeah.
And points back to Jesus.
Then
we explored the depth of God's love for us. A love that's unconditional and casts out all fear.
That's right.
And finally, we've been challenged to let that love flow through us to others, becoming living embodiments of God's grace and mercy in the world.
It's a high calling.
It is.
But it's also an incredible privilege to be part of something so much bigger than ourselves.
You know, what strikes me most about this whole conversation is the transformative power of love.
It is.
It's not just an abstract concept
No.
or a warm, fuzzy feeling.
Right.
It's a force that can change our lives,
Yeah.
our relationships, and ultimately the world around us.
And it's available to all of us.
Yeah.
Right here, right now.
Yeah.
It's not something we have to earn or achieve.
Yeah.
It's a gift we receive freely from God and are invited to share with others.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into 1 John chapter 4,
Okay.
I want to leave you with this question. If love is the defining mark of a true follower of Jesus, how will you choose to love today? In your interactions with your family, your friends, your coworkers, even those who are difficult to love.
Yeah.
How can you be a conduit of God's love in the world, even in the small, seemingly insignificant moments?
These are questions worth pondering.
They are.
And I hope this deep dive has given you some tools and encouragement to live out this love in your own unique way.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through 1 John 4.
It's been great.
It's been a deep dive indeed.